Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Joining me today on the podcast is Dave Snyder. Dave has a wealth of experience working with athletes as an athletic trainer in a variety of sports. Today, Dave and I discuss principles and framework considerations for you as a clinician or a coach in order to stay at your best throughout your career. How can you continue to develop? What are the litmus tests you should use in relation to information that you're getting? Is it worthwhile? Is it something you should add in, or is it something that's maybe, not going to fit your framework that way? This was an amazing discussion, really actionable discussion with Dave today, and I know you're going to love it. Be sure to check out the ARC course, which Dave is going to be hosting in the month of July, coming up very soon. Enjoy. Dave, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man, and I appreciate our growing population of mutual connections that way that helped us get here, whether that be Jake Wilkes or Tyler Lesher. We just happen to know a lot of the same phenomenal people, but maybe there's someone out there that doesn't know you as well as they do, or as well as I've gotten to know you lately. Would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great work you're doing down there at Baylor?
Well, Dave Snyder, I'm an athletic trainer. I'm the head athletic trainer for men's basketball at Baylor. I've been with men's basketball since about 2019. Prior to that, I spent about 16 years in college or professional football at various institutions and teams, and really cut my teeth in the football world, and then had to figure out how to translate that sort of experience into basketball when I moved into basketball.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think it's one of those things that it sounds like you've got a wide skill set or a wide array of skills that way, and you've worked with a lot of different sports. And it sounds like you also have a lot of experience in the space. And one of the things we were just talking about off recording actually was just that value that comes from putting your time in, if you will. And I'd imagine, because of the experience you've gotten, you've seen things come and go, you've seen approaches change. You've seen a lot of things evolve over time. And I think that's something that probably like sets you apart from a lot of other, like maybe the younger folks like me in the space.
Well, you're right. And if you spend a long enough time in anything, you're going to see trends come and go, and you'll see things that just kind of remain the same. So when it comes to my approach to rehabilitation or evaluation or assessments and my injury algorithms, I try to stick to the things that I feel like are the stalwarts, and then I adapt to the changes that I feel like are going to be something that's going to stick around for a little bit. And it's obviously got to be backed by science and evidence and everything like that. But I definitely try to tie my anecdotal experience in with the evidence-based practice as best I can.
Yeah, it's that kind of merging of everything together that way. And that's something, at least for myself personally, I kind of learned very quick outside of school, right? Like you get out of school, you get handed your degree, and you feel like you're ready to tackle the world and you can just solve everything, right? And of course, you can do it all yourself because you're autonomous in your practice. And then it took me probably less than a month into full-time clinical practice to realize I don't know nearly as much as I think I do. I have a lot left to go. And I was just overwhelmed at first by this amount of new information that was coming out all the time. And I was just kind of stuck in this, I wouldn't say full paralysis by analysis because I was doing stuff, but at the same time, it was just trying to kind of question everything that I was doing, why I was doing it. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed when you find yourself in those situations. I think one of the most essential elements is having some kind of built out framework or process for understanding what your own foundation is, right? How do I look at myself in the mirror and understand, hey, what are my strengths? What are the things I need to improve upon? what kind of things do I see a lot? Where is my kind of knowledge level really deep versus other areas? Maybe it's not as deep, but maybe it's a little bit more wide. And then ultimately, how do I build off of that foundation that way? And I think, again, it's getting more difficult now than ever, in my opinion, because I feel like every week new certification comes out, new research is being published, and it's challenging to keep up to date with all the changes that are occurring in the sports space that way. Walk me through kind of from your own experience that way. What has been your own kind of philosophy or approach to staying up to date with everything while also balancing the evidence with your own clinical practice? And how have you kind of built your career and built your success off of that initial foundation from school?
Yesterday, I asked a question on Instagram. I was like, what's one of the main barriers for success in athletic training or performance? And there are a lot of great responses, and two of them I think are some of the biggest barriers is ego and pride. And you know, if you can't get out of your own way, or if you don't have the practical humility to understand that you may not know everything, or there may be a better way to do it, then you're probably destined for failure or making a mistake. All the while, you can't be paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes because those are going to happen. But the way I'll say to the people that might work with me or the people that I might supervise is that, as long as your approach was sound and your rationale was sound and there was effort involved, is like if you make a mistake, it's okay. It's going to happen. You just learn from it and don't repeat it. So for me, it said, exactly like you said, early on in the profession, you felt like knew a lot. You're going to change the world. And then you realize the longer you're in it, the more you don't know. And, I'm perfectly content not knowing things, as in the fact that, when I find that there's something I don't know or I'm not very proficient in, I'm okay with that. I just make an effort to become an expert in it or to become sound in that thing, whether it be the concept of training or conditioning or injury evaluation or the use of various technologies or things like that. Is like I understand that there's always going to be things out there that I may not know a lot of. So I like to be a constant student. As I've come up throughout the profession, one of the things that's been a staple for me as it relates to my approach to rehab is movement. There's a time and place for static, stationary work, but if you can't progress them well, then they're not going to progress throughout the process well. And then the thing that we say a lot these days is return to play. It's been a thing that's become a position in a lot of teams. And over the years, that was just a thing that you did, but you didn't necessarily use the title all the time. And now you have return to play specialists. Well, what makes you a specialist in that besides title alone? So, as I've learned and progressed in all of those different types of areas, I lean on, the articles, the journals, things that are published that are peer reviewed, things that are not peer reviewed. And then I just read those and I try to just dissect them and see what's applicable and what's not, and try some things out. And then my network, and I'm always trying to expand my network. I'm fortunate to know a lot of really, really intelligent people in all the domains that we come into contact with, whether it be physician, athletic trainer, physical therapist, occupational therapist, strength coach, massage therapist, chiropractor. I mean, you name it, all these different domains come into contact with us potentially on a daily basis. Um, and I try to learn from them, and unapologetically, I try to just siphon knowledge off of them to help me in my own practice. And I'll tell them that. And the thing that I always offer to others as I learn from them is like I offer myself to them if there's ever anything that they would like to learn from me. But I look at it in all those approaches as it's going to benefit my athlete in some way or another, or it's going to benefit the administrator that's going to ask me my advice on something they're dealing with or something their child's dealing with. Because in this business, we get stopped at the store and say, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. What should I do? Hey, I'm taking this supplement. Is that okay? And if I have to, I might even consult our nutritionist before, giving an answer. Or if it's something I'm relatively knowledgeable in, I'll tell them my opinion. So, that's kind of the approach that I've taken is just, continue to learn, lean on my experience when necessary, and then lean on those that I've gotten to know over the years, because I really try to surround myself by people that I think are experts in their domain. And I think that's how this should be. It's one big collaborative. If I come along something that I think is new, I think it's exciting and it's going to help me with my student athletes, it's not a secret. I'll tell others about it because yeah, we all want to do our part to help our teams be successful in whatever it is we're working with, whether it's the military setting, the industrial setting, the college, professional, high school, what amateur. Um, but I want to help everybody that I know because I feel like I'm asking others to help me. So in turn, I would like to try to help others.
So well put, Dave. It's all about giving back to others, right? I've said this a lot lately that you can't go through life with a catcher's mitt in both hands. You have to learn how to throw something back that way. And the more you provide value to others, at least for me, I've found the more fulfilled I feel in my own life that way, right? There's that other quote. I probably sound like a bit of a philosopher at this point, but that rising tides raise all the ships in the water. And I think ultimately that's what we're after here. It's how do we
It's great.
lift others up and how do we get everyone closer to whatever their end goal is, knowing that everyone might have different goals? Or how do we get them closer to whatever their own definition of success is, knowing that success looks a little different for every single person that way? I think one of the big things you hit on the importance of the network, and that's something I learned a lot as well. Is initially for myself when I was in clinical practice, I was like, shoot, I just moved to an area where I don't really know anyone. I don't know who I can call. I don't know who to text. I don't have any emails. I don't really know what to do when I get in these situations where it's like, oh crap, where do I go from here? Versus after spending some time where I am now in Maryland, it's like, oh shoot, I filled my phone contact list with sports med physicians, local athletic trainers, and so on that way. So now it's like when something does go wrong, not only do I have access to other individuals, but we can also be more collaborative in the care
Mhm.
element because I think when it comes to rehabbing or providing strength and conditioning services to an athlete, you have to recognize early on that you can't do the whole thing yourself
Yeah.
regardless of what school taught you, because I was taught the same thing. You're autonomous, you can go out, you can do all the things yourself. You don't need other providers. And I'm sorry, but that's one of the biggest lies in the space. You
Yep.
have to learn how to lean on other people. And to use a Dan Taylorism here, you have to have low ego and high respect while
Yep.
doing so. You have to learn how to check your ego at the door. You have to learn that sometimes you're going to be called to steer the ship and take people throughout the entire journey with a little bit of support along the way. And you're going to have to fall into other situations where you're kind of playing more of the support role. You're on the back end, you're one of the extras in the movie, but that doesn't mean your role is not important in the final production. It means you're just called to play a different role than maybe you have in the past. And I think ultimately, as long as we keep our focus on those things I mentioned earlier, right? The outcomes, the goals, the success, and people are achieving those, at least for me, it no longer matters what role I play in the grand scheme of things in the bigger team. As long as we're getting where we need to get to, I don't care if I'm, main star or if I'm kind of somewhere off in the back, as long as we're getting the outcomes that we're after and we're doing right by the people we work with.
Couldn't agree more.
And the other thing you mentioned as well is you mentioned about just the overall knowledge base as well and how the knowledge base itself is ever evolving for you, right? You said you lean into your network, but you also lean into journals and articles and so many other sources of information that way. What kind of things have led you to like develop more of a systematic approach to doing that, if you will? And the reason I ask that is, at least for myself, I feel like I'm very streaky when it comes to knowledge. Where like one weekend I read 20 articles and then I won't read any again for a month. So is there a more maybe like methodical way to go about, taking all this information that's coming out and kind of maybe checking in on it regularly as opposed to almost binging information, if you will?
I think the simplest answer for me is the fact that it's very situational. So I need to be self-aware. If I'm not self-aware, none of the other things matter. If I don't know my strengths, if I don't know my weaknesses, if I don't have, and I'm going to steal a term from Phil Beckner, who's a notable basketball coach, and basketball trainer who I'm a huge fan of. He has things called guardrails. So I need to set up my own guardrails. And those guardrails for me are like, don't get stuck, don't get complacent, don't get so poured into what I'm doing right now that I'm not looking at other things. So some of the ways that I do that are if I'm dealing with something complex, I'll read some things about it. And I'll go and look at various types of journals or things, or even things that like Google pulls up from the, National Institute of Health or whatnot. And I look specifically at things. And then what I do is I try to follow good sources of information. So, if an article just today, an article talked about how, blood flow restriction, which I'm a huge fan of, has a really positive response as it relates to angiogenesis, which is fantastic. Great. Just continue to convince me why it's so good. So things like that. So I take specific approach, and then I try to surround myself with people and things that are going to continue to put things in front of me that I may not be looking at or looking for specifically, but I'll just, see that an article is posted. I'll stop and read it. I'll look at things that I think are great and how it might be applicable to me, and then I'll move on. And then I'll just refer back to that if I need to. So that's kind of the approach that I take for myself because I know myself pretty well. So I try to just have it come at different angles, so I can break out of my tunnel vision at times and pour into things.
And you mentioned about the metaphorical guardrails that you've kind of built up over time that way. I'd imagine that would kind of help as far as just filtering through the information that you read that way, because as you mentioned, some of the studies you look at, maybe they're peer reviewed, two thumbs up, maybe some are not, but there's still value in those, and there's still
Yep.
value in case studies, right? There was a individual I was working with the other day where the only literature I could find about the specific condition they had was literally case studies. So it was like,
Yep.
hey, this is far better than nothing that way. But having that own kind of personal little filter or litmus test to look through information and kind of filter out like, hey, this is really good, or hey, maybe this isn't as good, I think
Yeah.
it's really essential as well, especially when you get into the methods section of some of these papers and how they do the statistical analysis. And I'm by no means a mathematician, but
Yep.
I found certain papers that seem to be trying to get a certain outcome, which is the outcome they present. And I think knowing that you can kind of look at things through that lens really
Yeah.
separates your ability to, get really good information and have a really positive effect, as opposed to just kind of falling into these little like traps and snares that
Yeah.
unfortunately I feel like kind of get thrown into our profession that way.
Well, two specific examples of some things that I've looked at, and then I have to determine, but you have to know your sport and know your setting to be able to know if certain things are going to be applicable or not. And they may be perfectly valid as it relates to statistics, but not in my sport. So, for instance, you read some articles on recovery. Okay, this is great. Well, this is an article as it relates to a team that plays once a week. All right, well, that's a completely different program, and I can't follow that because in basketball, we don't play once a week. We play three times, sometimes four out of 7 days or whatnot. So it's not one out of seven. So I can't recover my guys the same that somebody that only plays once a week can because it's all about the programming. And some of the programming is under our control and some's not. Then it might be as it relates to like travel. Okay, well, how do you travel? How do you help guys recover as it relates to travel? Well, we travel differently, and we travel really well. I'm not gonna lie, but we travel a lot. So there's various things that we have to do there. And then as it relates, I'm really a big believer in like testing, but not testing for testing's sake, and not over analyzing some of the testing because it's more of like we need to do this a lot over the course of a long time to really watch it and then pay attention to certain things as we go that might be red flags, to know we need to adjust in some areas, or green flags to know that we're doing things right. Um, but jumping, when I jump my guys, can't follow the same protocol that they might once again for a team that maybe plays once a week because they can set certain days and I'm going to do this on this day every week, be consistent because I can, and so on and so forth. And with our schedule, we don't have the same consistency. So I can't find the day that everybody's the most recovered because our schedule might change periodically as the weeks go on. So I have to you know follow those things. I read the literature and these are how you should do it, but it may not always be applicable to me. So I have to find the best way that it's going to work for me. Or another example as it relates to some of the journals and the science behind certain things is like, yeah, we do rely on experience and some anecdotal evidence. And there's some things that we try as it relates to some of the treatments that we give. And we might combine certain treatments. One out of, we've seen that it's been positive. And then it's also maybe as it relates to time, like the amount of time you have with an athlete, you might need to superset your treatments, you know. So there's some things that we'll do, and there's not really a lot of literature on it yet, but there might. But it all will come from people saying, "Hey, you should do a research study on this because we've seen some really great things on this." And so it just kind of depends. But you just try to take everything in and evaluate it and see if you can apply it. Is it worth trying to apply? And then ultimately, with all of this that I just said, is like, are the athletes benefiting from it? Are they benefiting from the way I program their recovery based on our schedule? Are they benefiting from the information that they get when we do jump? Are they benefiting from the types of treatments that I do based on experience and time that we get and what we have available? So it just kind of, you've always got to be kind of on it.
On that point on if the athletes are benefiting that way, I'm going to take a shot in the dark and assume that there's been instances where the athletes are benefiting from things that you're doing that maybe from a literature standpoint don't hold up the best, right? Like take pulsed ultrasound as an example that way. That's come up in the past on the podcast where some individuals felt like it wasn't necessarily the best intervention for what the individual they were working with had going on, yet they always reported improvement and feeling better and playing better afterwards. So they did it anyways because, hey, we're seeing individual improvement.
Yeah.
However, it wasn't necessarily like option number one from the research standpoint. So I think knowing that, hey, sometimes the things that work for the individual in front of you might be, the seventh best thing, but if it's moving the needle in the right direction, then I think we're probably still willing to make that transaction.
I think there's something to be said about that. And I think that, in these things where you might compromise, you're not compromising to the detriment of the player, or you're not going against science, or you're not going against the literature to an extent. But yeah, you might be picking option four where you'd really love to do option one, but you might need to like circle back around to use one of the worst cliches in the business and try to go back to one, but that, this athlete feels great when they do this for one reason or another, both physically and psychologically. So, that's okay. You just have to sometimes understand I'm looking for little wins as many times as I can. And it's like, is this something I'm going to fight about and then develop a negative relationship because I refuse to do this because it's not the best mode at this moment. But you have to understand what the ultimate goal is for the athlete to feel good and then for them to feel ready and safe to go out and compete or practice or train or whatever it is. So yeah, I think that happens a lot in instances.
Quick break because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman, a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model. Absolutely, yeah. And as you mentioned, you have to begin with the end in mind, so to speak, that way. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was just the importance of knowing the sport that way. And, obviously each sport is a little bit different. Some sports I definitely see more literature and research on than others that way. But I've certainly learned a lot about sports that don't necessarily have a lot of research behind them. And, I didn't personally play them growing up, so I don't really have a whole lot of personal experience with by just having conversations with athletes and coaches within the space that way. And I think going back to the networking element, sometimes the best network is literally sitting right in front of you. You just have to be willing to kind of, reach out and have the conversation with them, right? Again, it's what can I learn from the individuals that I'm around, and how can I take that and use it to help other individuals that way?
I think you're right. I mean, there's something to be learned by everybody. I learned from my athletes coming in. The world now is where a lot of them are transfers. So there's times where when the dust is settled and we're working through things, like, hey, what sort of things have you done in the past? Did you feel like these things helped? Did they have some things that we didn't have? Things like that. As it relates to coaches, you know, if you have a really great coach, then why wouldn't you lean into them as it relates to like things that translate into play, whether it be drills, whether it be techniques, whether it be early integration to things. Like, why wouldn't you do that? It's like we have some great coaches here, and we've had great coaches that have been through here, and it's like. Sometimes they'll ask, what can, and I'm a big believer in do whatever you possibly can within the confines and restrictions of your injury status or rehabilitation status. So sometimes it seems silly, but it's like, can he sit down and do a certain type of drill with a basketball while seated? I'm like, well, it's not going to hurt him. It gets him to be able to get out and do something that he enjoys, even though it's about as base level as you could get, but there's value in it. So, why not learn from coaches? Why not learn from strength coaches? I mean, they're experts in that domain. I try to learn from nutritionists and what we can do as it relates to what can I support? How can I support them when we have guys going through process and we want to talk about supplements that are helpful? What's their nutrition? What's their caloric intake? What's their protein intake? We're all preaching hydration. My athletes tend to roll their eyes now as I relate to everything revolves around hydration. And there's a point where thankfully some do come back. It's like, you're right. So it's there's always something to be learned by folks around here. If we bring in speakers that speak to the team, whether it be about motivation or determination or planning or preparation or finance, whatever, there's always something to be learned. Everybody talks about the world that we're in right now is transactional. It's always been transactional. We just say it now. But you also can look at it as being transactional in different ways. So, when you're maybe selling what you're doing, selling your the rehab that you're gonna or your plan, or you're talking with agents, or you're saying this is like you need to sell your rehab philosophy. You need to sell your plan of action as it relates to surgery, to rehab approach, to the modalities you're going to use, to when you're going to use them, how often you're going to use them, why you're not using other things. Like everything's a transaction. So there's just so much to be learned. And it's almost like learn as much as you can, filter it out, and then stick to what you believe and how those things can enhance what you know to be true and what the evidence says to be true. And you can use the anecdotes from these other people to help just further that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I like that a lot, Dave. And I think the other piece too that goes along with all of that, you mentioned earlier about knowing yourself too. And a lot of these things are very difficult to do if you don't know your own strengths and weaknesses and how you function and how you operate as a clinician that way. And I think it's one of those things that's really difficult to do, and no one ever really gets taught how to do it, right? It's not like, oh, just follow these steps and now you know everything about yourself as a clinician, right? It's more of a matter of self-reflection and self-evolution that way. And I think it comes from, at least in my opinion, a couple different things. First off, you've got to be able and willing to put a lot of work in, because if you never put your nose against the grindstone, you're never going to realize how sharp you can get, right? You have to be willing to go out there and pound the rock day after day after day and put a lot of time in. But then you also have to be able to step back, step away from that, and reflect upon all the work that you just did. Look back and say, hey, here's what went well. Here's what didn't go well. Here's the conversations I had. Here's the things that I did. Here's the exercises, parameters, all the different things that could have impacted the success of whatever it is you were doing. Look back, reflect on it, see the outcome, think about how you did, and think about ways that, hey, these things were great. Other things, yeah, I could be better about those. That's something that I've started doing after every time I present to a group that way. There's certain presentations I've given that I'm like, man, that did not go really how I wanted it to. Here's what I should do different next time. And then there's other presentations I've given them like, man, that went so, so well. I just need to channel this, this, and this the next time I give something like this out to make sure that I highlight those. And, we're off to the races from there. So understanding like you have to put the timing, you have to do the work. If you don't have anything to reflect upon. But just as important as doing the work, I think you have to be able to take that step back and assess all the things that you just did. And on top of that, as well, in relation to that step back, I don't know if you've ever done this, but there's been times where I'd be working with an athlete or I'd have a new eval come in. And I'll literally just kind of step back for 30 seconds to a minute. Maybe there's like a curveball thrown at me that I didn't expect to be coming, or something along those lines. For whatever reason, I'm caught off guard, and whatever I was thinking is no longer how I'm thinking about it. So what I'll usually do is I'll step back and I'll kind of say, hey, look, give me a minute. I got to go check something real quick and just kind of collect my thoughts, think about things, and then re-engage, re-intervene from there. But sometimes the best step forward for us, in my opinion, is actually to just step back a little bit.
That's could be a multifaceted answer. I would say definitely for sure. When I was younger in the profession, I was all about the work. I was not about the reflection, and I wasn't great with feedback either. Um, and as I've grown in my experience and have been humbled, and I've tried to understand my ego and pride and sort of get past that, I've been able to step back and look at how things have gone, open myself up to for constructive criticisms and just any kind of feedback. And now I welcome feedback. I understand that it may not all be what I want it to be, but that's what you have to open yourself up to. But and that's helped me a lot. It's helped me be able to assess, what, this didn't go perfectly. This is some things that we could do different. I could have said this different. I could have communicated it better. I could have made sure that they understood what I was saying and I wasn't 10 steps ahead in my mind, but 10 steps behind in my communication, which can be the case often. So definitely stepping back and reflecting. And what you talked about, pulling back. I've done it in the immediate at times where I've looked at something, it's not what I thought it was going to be, so I had to pull back and kind of go back in with a different frame of mind and continue to dive into my assessment or whatnot to see what it is. But there's also been some things where we might, and I say we as in myself or people I'm working with or the domains that are involved, might be treating something. And, I can think of ankles and hamstrings and some things where it's like, it's an ankle. It's like you're just go, go, go. You're supporting it, supporting it, and supporting it. And you might have to sometimes step back. It's like, whoa, we might be doing too much, or we might be adding too much, or we might need to pull back and like realize that we're overdoing it and do a little bit less, to where they might make some strides because we're not inhibiting them by the treatment. Or even like the hamstring, there was years where I approached hamstrings all wrong. And it was probably 15 years ago where I realized that, because we would see soft tissue things, everybody does. And it'd be certain players mostly, but if you can catch a hamstring before it actually has, you know, damage, and you're in that low grade strain to spasm range, then what we would do though is we would work that hamstring out. We'd work it out and work it out because you needed to, because the hamstring was being symptomatic in a way. And then I pulled back, and a lot of it had to do with I took the corrective exercise specialist course years and years ago, and it was great, but it shaped how I look at things just right away, and that helped me in my approach to that. But what I did is like I stopped looking at the hamstring, and I started looking at the surrounding musculature. And I was like, well, why is the hamstring acting this way? And it's because it's taking the brunt of the work, and there's a lot of other areas that are not doing their job. I'm a big on analogy. So it's like other muscles aren't doing their job. So I started, and it's kind of like the survivorship bias. The hamstrings, the spots to take in all the bullets. But we need to really work on these other areas, because if they go, we're really in trouble. So started working the surrounding musculature, stopped focusing on the hamstring. If there wasn't any kind of actual significant tissue damage, it's just fatigued, and then we started seeing a lot more significant progress and quicker progress to the point to where I had to start telling my staffs and coaches like, hey, look, this isn't what you think. It's not necessarily a hamstring strain to the degree that you think. So don't expect hamstrings to respond this quickly like we're seeing. We just found it, saw it early, knew what to look for, knew a better approach. And then we started helping that sort of kinetic chain work more efficiently. But all of that was a result of step back. What are we really doing here? Why aren't we seeing success? And then shifting with what we learned.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point, and it's so interesting to bring that up about the hamstring example in particular, because I've been guilty of that myself in the past, where it's like, well, it's flared up, it's angry, it was injured, so let's just load it really hard and heavy and make it stronger. But sometimes it's not just the injured tissue that needs load, but everything else around it kind of needs to learn how to, whether that be produce force, absorb, reduce force, act in a true eccentric manner, whatever it is that way. How do we kind of look at everything else and say, like, hey, now's an opportunity to raise everything to a higher level and not just the tissue that's injured that way? Because obviously it's never just one thing that contributes to these injuries. It's always multifactorial and multifaceted. One of the other things you mentioned as you were talking was feedback. And you talked about how to take feedback, but I think just as important as taking feedback is giving feedback to other individuals that way. And that's another thing that, again, I never felt like I was taught how to take feedback and how to give feedback. And just like we mentioned, the filter in relation to research, how to filter the feedback you get, because there's some people that give phenomenal advice and I'd trust anything they say. And there's other people that give their feedback and I just don't really agree with it and I end up going a different direction. And I'm not going to say it's wrong. It's just, it doesn't really pass that personal gut instinct test for me, if you will, that way. How have you, as a clinician, gone about, getting better, improving at taking feedback, but also improved in the way that you give feedback to others that way as well?
That's a great question and a great way to describe it. Like a lot of athletic trainers, I can be guilty of sarcasm and poorly timed wit. But for me, it's that, sometimes people give feedback and, you might want to say, hey, thanks, but I didn't ask. Um, so for me, it's feedback is like others are going to give it. And I need to understand that they're just trying to help. And they may not have the full context and understanding of the situation and sort of all the different things that you've worked through and have tried out. And it's just not working yet. But and that's great. And I've tried to become better about taking that, understand, being kind, and then continuing on. And then what I've done though, to me, the best feedback is from established relationships. So if you don't have great relationships in this profession from all the different domains, then you're going to fail probably more often than not. So what I do is if I have something really complicated or really troubling, or I'm just beating my head against a wall, I go to my network of what I look at as the best of the best. And I present them, this is what I'm doing. This is what I've tried. This is what I'm seeing. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? Because I'm too, you know, um, I'm not necessarily a stoic, but I've read a lot of the different books on stoicism, things like that. And if we're emotionally involved in something, then we're not necessarily going to always see it with the same clarity that somebody is not. So once again, years doing this, I've tried to become as self-aware as I can. I know that. So I have to separate, understand I'm too emotionally tied to this thing because I pour everything into it. So I was like, I need to step back. I need to take somebody that's purely objective because they're not emotionally tied to it. And then what do they think? So I've kind of cultivated the relationships of what I look at as like an elite team of people in all the different domains that I can ask them and get their opinion. And then they could say, "Hey, you're being ridiculous. What are you doing? This is crazy." And they could say that, and it just, doesn't phase me because I know that A, they care about me. We've established a relationship of mutual respect, and they want what's best for me and for me to be the best at what I do. So if they've gone through that vetting process of my own, then, you know, I'll do it. And they also understand because we all deal with high level athletes and there's a lot of like um respect and understanding is like, this is a complex problem I'm dealing with. This might be an elite individual that I'm dealing with. I need everybody to treat this as such. And then, respect that privacy as it relates to, I've got a problem. I need your help, but I don't need you broadcasting it to everybody. So, I've just put that together over the years. And when it comes to injury evaluation, physician selection, rehab, performance analytics, you name it, I've got various people in all those domains that I can go to that can give me a true, caring, unbiased opinion to help me like get over some of those hurdles. So,
100.
and that's taken years to develop.
Yeah, 100%. It takes so much time to build those relations and that network and connection that way. And just as long as it takes to build, on the flip side, you can destroy the whole thing in seconds with your actions, with your words. Understand that, while it may be your goal to have this robust network and trust in everyone and so on that way, there's a lot of that great power with great responsibility, so to speak, in this space as well. And as you mentioned, it's like, hey, there's certain things that maybe we shouldn't say, that maybe we shouldn't, we should leave private conversations as private conversation, if you will,
Yep.
because I've found, at least again in my own opinion, if you start to say too many different things that way, you can turn a lot of people away. It's knowing, how do I, again, treat others with respect? How do I keep my ego low and my respect level high? You could
Yep.
completely disagree with what someone says, but that doesn't mean I'm going to turn it into a big shouting, screaming match and ruin the relation, right?
Right.
As you mentioned, it's one of those things that you have to understand your emotions, that emotional intelligence piece. Again, not often taught in the space, but so, so essential in my opinion, not just in relation to feedback and connections and networking with other providers that way, but also in relation to the actual work you do with athletes, because you're unfortunately going to face difficult times. Athletes all face difficult times. You, as the provider for them, are no exception. Just like they go through hills and valleys, you're also going to experience hills and valleys. I like to think I'll never be the guy that this happens to, but at some point, an athlete that I worked with is going to come back in with another injury. Maybe they re-tore their ACL. Maybe that shoulder labrum repair didn't hold up, whatever it is. Maybe some of that was influenced by my own actions. Maybe it had nothing to do with me, but regardless, those bad situations are going to happen. And if you can't control your own emotions and your own response to those situations, then ultimately you're not as adequately prepared as you could be for them. Same thing for you on the AT side. Like, you probably see some gruesome acute injuries that you have to respond to. And if you can't keep your cool in that moment, how do you know you're getting the correct assessment, right? You only really get one, maybe two shots if you're lucky at a lock bend or pivot shift when someone goes down with a non-contact knee injury. If you're not completely dialed and locked in that moment, then we could be making the incorrect judgment call.
There's a book by Malcolm Gladwell talking about Blink, and at the beginning, it makes everybody think that if you just make your gut reaction, if you make your gut decision, then you're going to make it right. But he follows that with saying, well, basically, your first reaction is probably right if you are an expert in your field. So first, become an expert, then you can lean on your evaluations in the time where it's time sensitive, and you understand that just something is not right. You need to just understand that and go with it. But it's not just based out of feeling, it's based out of experience. I once had a student athlete that, and thankfully I saw it, but I once had a student athlete in football that was hit and was essentially knocked unconscious on the hit. And he woke up when he hit the ground. So, but I knew based on knowing the athlete, I also watched that play, thankfully, and I saw how he went down. I was like, none of that is right. But then I saw that when he hit the ground, he came to. So I was like, I trusted everything that I knew about that kid, about what I just saw, to where I needed to go intervene to help remove them because he he was that was an injury, a significant one, and but it was unique. But yeah, it was like it can't happen any faster than that, because it was almost like you had to convince everybody else that it happened, because they didn't really see it that way. They didn't watch them as an individual and how they went down a certain particular way. So, but then, when I then showed it to them on film later and it's like, hey, look at this, look at how we did this, they were like, oh man, I didn't even see that. But yeah, you've got to develop experience and then you've got to lean on that experience to where you can make the best decision. And sometimes they're quick. I love lengthy amount of time to make a decision. I mean, who doesn't? But you also have to be comfortable and capable to be able to make decisions really quickly.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. It's one of those things that there's a time component to everything we do. And towards the beginning, you also mentioned about return to play and that kind of return to play specialist element as well, and the evolution of return to play that way. Boy, that's another thing in particular that I feel is so time pressured lately. I know in the ACL world, for example, we tell athletes 9 to 12 months. I think they only ever hear the 9. They never hear the 12. And I sometimes think maybe we should reframe the way we say that to athletes. Hey, it'll take up to 12 months. Might be a little sooner, but consider 12, not 9, because now more than ever, at least I've felt this pressure to, hey, this athlete has to be back at the 9 month mark, or in some cases, athletes feel like they need to be back before the 9 month mark. And again, that
Yeah,
time pressure of knowing we don't have that significant length of time to get this athlete back. We have so many boxes to check. And,
yeah,
7 months or 8 months might sound like a lot, but there's a lot of instances that it's like, you know what? Another month would be extremely helpful or extremely beneficial here. So, on that time component and time pressure, I think that impacts the short-term game and acute game just as much as the long-term game and big picture game as well. And I think it's one of those things that you have to have real conversations with people. And going back to the importance of the networking and relation building, that's not just with other providers, but that's ultimately with the athletes that you work with, right? That's, I think,
yeah,
why most of us do what we do on the day to day is to have those connections, relations, have those kind of impacts and so on. But part of that relation is sometimes being the one to unfortunately deliver the bad news and say, look, like, we're not where we want to be. We're not where we should be. Here's some different things that I think could have contributed to it. Here's what we're going to do about it from here. But ultimately, knowing like, hey, look, it's not the right time, it's not the right spot. And again, making sure that everyone is on the same page about that too, right? Like, obviously, if you've got one member of the high performance team saying good to go and two others saying no, they're not, it makes a real difficult situation that way. There's an AT I was talking with just a few weeks ago, Ethan, down with the Carolina Core, and he was outlining their process to me, how they get everyone down in the room together, whether that's team doc, AT, strength coach, coaching staff on the team, everyone, and they all sit down and they make a mutual decision of are they going back to sport or are they not going back to sport? Because now it's not on one person to make the call or the decision. It's a mutually agreed on decision. And again, it's easy to miss stuff. I miss stuff all the time, but I don't stay there. When you have 10 sets of eyes instead of one, it's a lot more difficult to miss some of those little things that
right.
become so essential in these like very difficult situations we fall into.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you've got to have that. A lot of sets of eyes, a lot of communication. I think that's some of the things like, you talk about 9 to 12 months. I mean, we're still dealing with the concept of 6, and rarely is it 6. And there might be times where somebody's ready in 6, and if they're ready and they've met all the criteria, then okay, great. I'm not a big believer in holding somebody back because it's fast. I mean, if they've hit the necessary criteria and they've excelled in their training and their limb symmetry index is where it needs to be and all that sort of thing, great. You are an exception. You are blessed with amazing DNA and a great central nervous system. But if you're not and you fall into the category of that typical, potentially 9 months to 12 months, that's also okay. But I think a lot of hands and eyes are also great is like as you begin those long-term types of rehabs, there's times where life is happening all along the way. And there might be things here and there that get in the way, whether it be the athlete's schedule or holidays or whatever. So the other eyes and hands are involved as well. It's like, hey, look, we're not hitting the marks that we need to hit. every 2 weeks or every time we reassess or things like that. We need to like dial back in on some of these things, you know. We need to focus back in on this deficiency or enhance this range of motion or whatever. They're ready to progress. We need to run, we need to jump, you know, we need to load more, you know, things like that. So I think that's really valuable. If you can have a really well-oiled performance team, then it makes everything better. And essentially, it makes programs better. And that's where it's like, well, how do we fit? That's where we fit into whatever team or clinic or hospital or whatever that you're working with is like you're working efficiently and your people are getting better, and then it's putting people back on the floor, you know, in the industrial setting, decrease in time loss, decrease in work loss, you know, whatever it is. But it's pivotal. So if folks don't have that, they need to seek it out and try to get it. And sometimes, you know, the setup might not be fit for that depending on the location, but you can still try to put that together in your own way as best you can. So it's huge, and those are also what could be considered guardrails: is more people, more eyes to help you just not miss something.
100%. I love that. I love that, Dave. I realize we could probably talk about this all day long because we're obviously both very passionate about the space that way. Is there anything we missed in our discussion or any other kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks you got?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, I could talk about some of this stuff all day long, but you know, I think that, you know, as sports and just, you know, the aspects that we both share as it relates to health is ever evolving. I think you just got to continue to advance, you know, continue to advance the network. You know, people you've referenced earlier on and that folks that sort of got us together is that those are just based on relationships, and those were both based on extension of ourselves. You know, speaking of Tyler Lesher, Tyler's been fantastic. It's become a great friend of mine in the business, and you know, it all stemmed from us going and playing each other in an MTE in Las Vegas, and then we both communicated going into that, and we met up and hung out some, and just that's where it started, and it's been fantastic, and it's been incredibly fruitful for me, and hopefully me to him. But it's about relationships. I mean, that's, you know, who can you lean on? Who can you throw ideas by? Hey, what are you doing that I'm not doing? What's working for you? And that's where most of my probably success has come from is just being a subject of knowing great people. Just like some of the teams that I've been a part of with success, you know, it's like, you know, we had great players, we had great coaches, we had a great strength coach, we had great doctors, you know, all those things make me better, you know, so it also inspires me to be better as well. So, but without those, may not see the same success. So I'm really fortunate is the way I look at it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love that. Always having that attitude of gratitude and just being thankful for the people you get to connect with, the impact you get to have on others, and the role you get to play in the grand scheme of things. Dave, for people who want to find out more about you, or maybe they want to find out more about the advanced rehab certification, where can they find you all at?
You know, I try to make myself available as best I can within the confines of time, but I like to think that I get back to people pretty quick, and I'm always open to answering questions if they ever have any. But I think right now the easiest way to get me is on Instagram. It's probably where I'm the most active. I'm DP Snide on Instagram, and I'm trying to grow there because I think it's probably a great platform for growth and idea exchange. So that's where they can find me, and I'm always happy to help if somebody has a roadblock, and just give a fair, unbiased opinion.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's awesome. We'll link to that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything that Dave's up to and reach out to him directly. If you're interested in finding out more about the advanced rehab certification, Dave, this was awesome, man. Really appreciate your time and thank you for everything you're doing, man.
Thank you.